Hello. Ooh, let's just check. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what could be described as Doctor Who's Easter episode as the TARDIS team travel back into the 1950s Miami and they enter a cinema where something mysterious has been happening. Yes, that's right. Today we're talking about Doctor Who Lux, and this looks like something that could be very interesting. Not quite what we've seen before, but it also looks like something that has overtones of the Devil's Chord. Will this be a new and innovative take, or are we going to tread some old ground yet again? All of this and more we will talk about in this very video, but do be aware that this is likely to contain spoilers, so that if you haven't seen the show, then please do go and watch that before returning to this video. And with all that said and done, and if you're still sitting here watching, then please do join me as we go beyond the sofa. Well, I can barely believe it's been a week since that we were sat here last discussing the Robot Revolution. I've had some very, very positive comments on the last video. Thank you for those of you who did comment, including a couple of not so positive ones as well. One commenter did say, just stop it, but I think that he was more angry about his slogan being rejected by Nike than anything else. Since then, we've had the viewing figures come in, but we've yet to have the 7-day figures. At least I haven't seen them yet. It's been early in the morning for me so far, so I haven't looked to see if they've been published. I don't think they have yet. I'm not entirely sure. What we saw was Doctor Who get around 2 million views on the night. Now, that doesn't take into account the fact that it was available over 10 hours before the actual broadcast, and people may be more likely to watch it on iPlayer this time. I don't know, especially the demographic that they seem to be targeting. And it would seem to make some sense that we're going to get a bigger boost from iPlayer than we might have done in previous years. I don't know, we'll see what happens. Having said that, 2 million viewers for what is a flagship television programme is not a particularly good look. Now look, I am not one of these people who think that because it isn't getting 13 million views, it used to get that many. I think 10 and 11 million, maybe capped out on, I'm not sure. But because it's not getting that now, that the show's inherently flawed and the sky is falling and the end of the world is nigh, it is worth pointing out, though, that similar dramas at different times of the week are getting better viewing figures than Doctor Who is. And I'm not entirely sure that's because it's on a Saturday night, because Beyond Paradise, which is going out on a Friday night, is doing over 5 million views. It's true that the TV landscape has changed. It's true that we shouldn't be expecting to get anything like the 10 million views that it used to get. 2 million, however, for a show that could bring in 7, I would think. Just a couple of years ago, it would have got 7. That's not good. There is a massive caveat to all of this, of course, which is that we don't know the criteria for which either Disney or the BBC are treating this as a success. The very fact that we know a particular demographic that these companies go after has been more engaged with Doctor Who will change the maths. If not for Disney, then possibly for the BBC. The BBC is in a strange position where viewing figures are concerned, because they've never actually mattered that much to it. It's not like America, where big companies have ratings wars, because the more people who have their eyes on the channel at one time, the more revenue that company can generate. The BBC isn't like that, and it tends to see viewing figures as a trend rather than a means to an end. It should be pointed out that when Doctor Who was cancelled back in the 80s, the viewing figures were actually quite strong for that time of night. So whilst I think the show can do better, and it deserves to do better, and it should strive to do better, I also don't think that this metric alone is the death knell of the show. It's an interesting look, but that's about it. Now, on to Lux. As the TARDIS materialises in 1950s Miami, all is not as it seems at the Palazzo Theatre. This was a stark change from last week. I thought this was an awful lot better, much more in line with what we've seen from Doctor Who in the past. The pacing, I thought, was an awful lot better. Robot Revolution was particularly stuffed, and it made the episode feel somewhat bloated and stuffed into the time slot. Lux, by contrast, is a little more light and a little more shade. It gives the audience a bit more of a breathing space, and honestly, I think that was what was missing from other episodes. It had room to breathe. Also, something that would always be an issue for the first non-white TARDIS team in the 1950s is dealing with the idea of segregation. And I think that that was competently handled here in a way that acknowledged it and, it mentioned it, but it didn't. It allowed the episode to happen around it. It didn't make it a rod for its own back. It's not suddenly a hang-up of the show that we start out in one story and then dive into a rabbit hole, which, let's be honest, is a story that could fill volumes. What we do get here is the Doctor facing off against the God of Light. I'm sure it means that people will suggest, I'm sure this is just a sort of a retreading of old ground of Devil's Chord. And it does have certain parallels with that episode from last year, even down to the villain using a symbol of their medium in order to trap one of the TARDIS team. But there are some really nice ideas here as well, especially the idea of Time Lord's bodies being built from light, which allows the villain to formulate his plan. It's really nice seeing some cause and effect in an episode. The villain's plan isn't already set in stone, and it changes because they then run into the Doctor. It does make you wonder what the timeline of these gods is, though, whether they exist outside of time, because Lux refers to things that temporarily wouldn't have happened. Temporally, maybe. I thought that was a prawn. But stuff that wouldn't have happened outside, it wouldn't have happened yet. It would have happened outside the story that we're in. And these aren't plot holes necessarily. They don't detract from the story. I suppose what most people will be talking about, though, is the bit in the middle where the Doctor meets fans. Now, there's some speculation before the episode that it would be revealed the Doctor's inside a television show all along. Now, that technically happened, but it also didn't happen because it turns out that that wasn't real and that the fans themselves weren't real. The fact that it's later revealed that the fans still exist, even though they were meant to disappear into the ether, is neither here nor there. They're part of the God's universe, and we don't actually understand, or we don't have any in-universe explanations of how that works. So I think that's fine. I did quite like the section with the fans. I thought it would be very easy for a writer of the show to have a go at the more toxic elements of fandom, but I actually saw this section as a little bit of a love letter to fans in general, and that was quite nice. We've got to remember that Russell T Davies was first and foremost a fan of the show, and even little digs at the stereotype I feel were done with a little bit of reverence to those of us who enjoy watching. I really liked the production values in this. Now, last week I said that it would be nice if we had more grown-up looking production values, and that may have given the wrong impression, because I actually quite liked the whole retro-futurism aesthetic that they had in Robot Revolution. What I wasn't so keen on was the fact that they'd taken that aesthetic and they'd made it very cartoony. Here, where you're actually dealing with a cartoon, you don't have that so much. There is a particular look and feel that the Bad Wolf Doctor Who era has, which doesn't really feel grounded in reality in the same way that the Chris Chibnall era's production values did. I think we're in a time right now where audiences are expecting more realism from their shows. I've certainly seen in comments on Marvel films and on Marvel series, I've seen a lot of people say that even though they enjoyed the thing they were watching, they'll comment on it and say that it looked too cartoony or that it didn't quite look believable. And it's actually one of the praises that Daredevil Reborn, or Born Again, what's it called? I can't remember. But the new Daredevil series, they said that it doesn't quite fit into that Disney look and feel. So perhaps Doctor Who shouldn't look like the most Marvel of Marvel shows. Also, I don't think it really helps if it exists with a colour palette of a police procedural. It really needs to sit somewhere in the middle. And with this episode, the tonal style actually works because you're dealing with the 1950s anyway, and that aesthetic really fits the era that we're dealing with. One of the things that you might notice if you rewatch the episode is that actually this is a very, very simple plot. Not much happens here. And that's a really good thing. I talked about it being able to breathe earlier on. This is one of the reasons. You have a villain with a clear motivation, you don't have muddled themes throughout, and the act of solving the riddle of the story does not seem laboured. It's not a perfect episode, though. When we first meet Mr. Ring-a-Ding, we're posed the question, what does he not do? And later on in the episode, we get a reveal which is positioned as something that should have been worked out by the audience. But we're never actually given any clues to what the answer could be. So that didn't quite work for me. The very fact that Lux has to explain this to the Doctor and the Doctor doesn't work it out for himself makes me think that this was just framed slightly badly. It's not a major problem, but it was noticeable. Also noticeable, and I'm going off script here a little bit, also noticeable for me was the moment where the Harbinger thing came out, the don't make me laugh. I thought that was quite neat. And then there's a bit of a rumble and letters fall off the building and it says Harbinger. And the Doctor turns and looks in the direction of the letters and then goes, Harbinger. That didn't quite work for me. It almost felt like the Doctor was meant to be able to see through walls, and he clearly can't. He's not Superman, after all. I wasn't too keen on the bit where they were trapped in the movie or why the people returned. I mean, it seemed to me that on a show like this, the Doctor would have one major motivation, and that's returning the people. Lux himself is a threat, but it's not a serious world-ending threat because, as the plot twist reveals, he can't leave the prison of the theatre. But the trapped audience members are something different. And I would have loved to have had an in-world explanation of how they were released and not, burnt to fire when the whole place went up. More so, I would have loved to have had it be the Doctor who does something smart and clever to release them. Doctor Who has often been likened to Sherlock Holmes because each story has a mystery at its heart which the Doctor has to solve. And I feel that we had too much of the Doctor trying to save himself and Belinda without actually worrying about the trapped audience at all, and that their plight was kind of unimportant until the end when they needed an emotional hook for the finale. So I think there is still some structural problems here, but there are far fewer than we saw last week. And overall, I really enjoyed this episode, and I'll probably sit down tonight and watch it again as it goes out live. Something that I actually didn't bother to do for Robot Revolution. I'm not sure I've got much more to say about this. It was enjoyable. It was fast-paced, but there was plenty of breathing room in it as well. And it had a bit of a love letter to us fans in the middle too. So much better than last week, and genuinely something that makes me want to watch the next episode. And that's where I want to be as a fan, excited for the next episode because the last one was good. That's what I think. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. But for now, this is the end of the video, and I'll see you next week where we will be dealing with The Well. If you do celebrate Easter and you're watching over Easter weekend, I hope you have a wonderful celebratory weekend and all of the chocolates that you can handle. But that's it until we meet again and take another journey beyond the sofa.